again and welcome back to the PhatPhish Guitar Studio. I did a video a little while ago where I did a comparison, like a shootout, between this made in USA Fender Strat and this made in Mexico Strat. Basically the USA Strat comes with a few features that the Mexican one doesn't, and it comes with a much heftier price tag. The Mexican, more traditional features and a more modest price tag, so what was the difference between them? If you're really interested, I'll put a link in the information section down there if you want to go and have a look at the full shootout. But basically I got a comment on that video the other day from Corey, I think it was, who posted the comment and said, is it not the case though that the trem on the Mexican, like this traditional style 6-screw trem, doesn't stay in tune as well as the two-post knife edge style trem that's in the USA Strat? In answer to that question, in my case, no. The trems on the two guitars stay in tune as well as each other. In fact, the tune and stability is as good as it is on like the Floyd Rose system that I've got on a couple of other guitars. The reason for that is I made sure I spent some time getting the guitars set up and addressing the various points where tuning instability can occur, and making sure that I set the guitar up right so that wasn't going to be a problem. So what I'm going to do today is put the guitars on the bench and kind of show you where the potential problem areas are, and talk about what you can do to address those and make sure that you can have a Strat trem, whether it's a two-post system like this or a traditional system like that, and making sure that they will stay in tune and you don't need to worry about using the tremolo arm and knocking the guitar out of tune. Okay, so let's go down, put the guitar on the bench and start having a bit of a poke around. Here we can see the tremolo system on the USA Strat in a bit more detail. This is a relatively modern design. The one that's on the made in Mexico Strat, which we'll take a look at in a minute, is a more traditional style trem unit. This is the more modern sort, where you've got two pivot posts underneath each of the E strings, rather than having a traditional 6-screw arrangement. But the principle behind this trem, the more modern style or the more traditional one, is basically the same. You've got the tension in the strings counterbalanced with the tension in some springs that are inside of the guitar body. And we'll have a look inside the tremolo cavity in a while. But basically what happens is you push down on the tremolo arm, you release the tension on the strings and the note goes lower, and as you release the pressure on the tremolo arm, the springs inside the body kind of pull back, bring the guitar back to pitch. And some tremolos can be set what's called floating, where you can pull the tremolo arm up to raise the pitch, and then as you release the tension on the strings, pulls the thing back to balance. So really it's just a case of a balancing act between the tension in the strings and the tension in the springs inside the body. So more or less tension in the strings is balanced against less or more tension with the springs inside the tremolo cavity. But key to setting up any guitar with the tremolo system, to be honest, this is true to setting up any guitar, it's all about eliminating points of friction. And on a guitar like this, the most important place to look at to address the issue of potential friction is down at the headstock end. So let's take a look down at the nut. So down at the headstock end here, we'll look at potential points of friction that we need to take care of when we're doing a guitar setup. The most important really is the nut here. So what happens when you use the tremolo and you change the tension in the strings, and even on a non-tremolo system guitar, if you're bending the strings, what happens is the strings can move through these nut slots. That's the point, they need to move. What can happen if the nut slots haven't been cut to quite the right size for the strings that you're using, the strings can catch in here. So the first thing to check is that the nut slots are actually right for the gauge of string that you're using, particularly if you've bought a guitar, and generally like these Fender Strats come with 9 to 42 gauge strings. If you've gone up a string gauge or two, then you might find that the nut slots are getting a little bit snug and the strings can kind of catch because the nut slot's not big enough for them. What you need to do there is actually file the nut slot a little bit bigger. Possibly a job for a professional luthier if you're not used to doing this sort of job, because you do need specialist files, and the sort of thing, if you get it wrong, you've ruined the nut and you need to replace it completely. But the other thing to consider is just how well lubricated that nut is. Now, nuts come in a varying range of different materials, whether it's plastic, bone, resin, brass, what have you, graphite, and to some degree or another there'll be a natural amount of lubrication from the material, just because of the amount of friction that you get. Something like a graphite nut is very much like a self-lubricating nut, because graphite is just naturally quite slippy. Something like a plastic nut or a resin nut, you might need to help the strings to move smoothly over the nut slots. And what you can do is, when you're doing guitar setup, if you take the string out of the nut slot, so you've got the slot there, just in there, either rub a very soft pencil, something like a 4B or softer pencil, and that'll just deposit some graphite into the nut slot, which will act as a natural lubricant, or just a tiny drop, and make sure that you pick up you clean up any residue, just a tiny little drop of oil, like a light sewing machine oil or something like a 3-in-1 oil. Don't use something like WD-40 or silicone spray. It's too light, it'll just wear off too quickly. You need like a mineral oil, say like a sewing machine oil. Just a tiny drop in there, and it'll just help the strings to move smoothly. You may also find some guitars have what's called a roller nut here, and what happens in a roller nut, they're made out of metal, and underneath each string there is literally a little metal roller, like a wheel almost, that the string passes over, and that moves backwards and forwards. And the idea is that that's a very low friction sort of mechanism. Relatively complex though compared to something like this, and to my mind I've never been a big fan of them, because it's my experience, the more moving parts you have, the more chance there is of failure, the more, a little bit of dust or grit or something's going to get in and foul the mechanism, and it's not going to work so well. I know some people swear by them and wouldn't have anything else on the guitar other than a roller nut. Personally, I just like a good resin nut or a bone nut or a graphite nut I've got on some of my guitars. Well set up, well lubricated, and it'll do the job. Also down the headstock end we've got things like the string tree, which is a potential point of friction because the strings move through it. Now I much prefer like the roller style string tree that we've got on the guitar here, and indeed I replaced the string tree on my Mexican Strat with something similar, because the strings will move more smoothly under this style. And also you need to make sure that the strings are wound around the machine heads properly, and there's no silly possibility that as the strings lose a lot of tension that they're going to slip around the machine head, so everything needs to be nice and snug down here. Okay, let's go back to the body end. Now the saddles are another potential problem area. This Strat has got the more modern, like very solid steel saddles on them. We'll have a look at it in a second at the Mexican Strat, which has got the more traditional bent metal. But the same principle applies in both cases. That the string comes to the tremolo block out of a hole and passes over the saddle. What you need to be careful of is that there's no rough edges or sharp points or anything here where the string can kind of get caught on. So as you lower the tension on the string, it'll move over the saddle. You need to be sure that when you release the tension and the string comes back to pitch, it's not going to be catching on anything and potentially sticking slightly sharp or slightly flat. Okay, so now I'm going to remove the tremolo arm and flip the guitar over, and we'll take a look at the inside, because I want to show you what happens inside the tremolo cavity behind the guitar where those springs are. Okay, so 6 screws to remove, and we can get this black back plate off and into the tremolo cavity itself. So in terms of tremolos, this is where it all happens. You've got the tremolo block here that the strings pass through, and on your guitar you may have more or less. On this particular guitar there are 3 springs holding it in place, and these are attached to what's called the claw. So there's a straight end of the spring goes into a hole here, and then like a circular end goes over a hook on the claw. And the advice I've been given is to have the springs straight. Sometimes you see guitars where you've got the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 holes here and the 5 hooks on the claw, so you can have up to 5 springs on the tremolo if you want to have it very, very stiff, or kind of flat against the body. Here I've got 3 springs on holes 1, 3 and 5, but sometimes you'll see where it's number 1 on the block, but it's at an angle to number 2 on the claw. So you kind of got to go across at an angle. That makes the spring slightly longer and a bit more tense. But there is a school of thought that says that means that the spring's not hooked as cleanly on the claw, because again, this is all about points where things can catch or you can have friction. So something you need to watch for, and particularly if you've got like a cheaper copy guitar where the parts might not be made as well, is if you've got any rough edges or sharp bits and bobs around these hooks on the claw, is as you're moving the tremolo, the springs can move slightly, potentially on here, and when you release the trem, the springs don't settle back exactly where they came from, because they've kind of moved slightly and got stuck on a rough edge. And because there's a balancing act going on between the tension in these springs and the tension in the strings on the guitar, if these go back with a little bit more tension, then it's going to pull the guitar slightly out of tune. So you need to make sure there's no rough edges and everything here is set up nice and cleanly, so there's no potential sticking points and everything's set in place properly. Right, so I've swapped over now, and this is the Made in Mexico Strat, which has got a much more traditional tremolo system on. And you'll notice between this and the Made in USA Strat there's a couple of significant differences. Firstly, this is attached to the guitar with 6 individual screws rather than the 2 pivot posts that we had on the USA Strat, and also the saddles are a little bit different on this. Let's talk about these screws first of all. Now, I've heard that back in the day Fender only wanted to use a couple of screws rather than all 6. The fact it's got 6 really is more for aesthetic reasons. But the way that the screws attached the tremolo plate to the body affected the performance slightly, because here the tremolo system is just moving backwards and forwards. You've got a certain degree of movement. In the USA Strat, the tremolo is kind of got like a knife edge on it, so the movement is a bit more pronounced. The same principle applies in terms of setup, though. You need to make sure that the trem is moving freely backwards and forwards, and there's no rough edges on those screws, or on the trem where it touches the screws, anything that's going to stick and potentially not settle back into the same place that it came from, when you release the tension on the tremolo wall. Saddles, these are the traditional, what's called the bent metal style saddles. Same again as with the USA Strat, you're looking for points of friction. Is there any rough edges on here where the string could catch? So when you move the tremolo arm down, when it comes back up to pitch, is everything moving smoothly over there and nothing's going to catch? With the screws attaching the trem to the body with the saddles, there's different schools of thought as to which one provides you with a better sound. Some people will say that the solid metal ones give you better sustain. Other people actually think that the bent metal ones, something about the way that they transmit the vibration of the string, actually give the guitar a better sound. It's just subjective. Same principles apply with this though as with the USA Strat. For the other parts of the system, making sure that the springs inside the guitar body are well set up and there's no rough edges or things that the springs are going to slip and catch on. And down at the headstock end, the nut is nicely cut and well lubricated, so the strings are going to move smoothly, and no points of friction at the string tree or on the machine heads or anything like that. It's all about removing points of friction. So that pretty much covers Strat trems. What I'm going to do though is quickly mention locking tremolo systems. For this I'm going to get my Thompson custom guitar, which has got a shallow Floyd Rose on it, and let you see something on that. This is my Thompson custom guitar, and it's got a, as you can see, a much different tremolo system on. This is what's called a Floyd Rose system. Floyd Rose came up with I think one of the first locking tremolo systems. What a locking system does is it kind of minimises the points of friction by giving you a very fixed length of string between the saddles here and the nut. Important thing with the locking tremolo system is the locking nut. So let's pop down to the headstock end before we do anything else and explain how that works. So this is the locking nut. Here the strings go over a metal nut, and we have these clamps that go down, so each pair of strings, these unscrew to allow you to set the guitar up. Then once the guitar's at pitch, this block goes down and screwed into place, and it prevents the string from moving over the nut. It is literally locked here, so you've got a fixed length of string between the nut and the bridge, but because it's locked here, there's no chance of it sticking as it moves over the nut, catching on string trees, not being kind of quite right on the tuning posts. There's no capacity for tension to get mismatched between that side of the nut and the headstock, because sorry, the playing side finishes at the nut and it's locked here. Okay, so that's the locking nut down at the headstock end talked about. Let's have a look at the actual tremolo system itself. Now this is, as I say, is a Floyd Rose system. It's actually licensed by Floyd Rose and built by Schaller. Personally, I prefer this over the standard Floyd Rose system. It's one of those things, Schaller kind of licensed the patents from Floyd Rose to build their own system and make one or two little tweaks to the design as they go along, and I actually prefer this. There's a few licensed by Floyd Rose systems on the market. Some of them I get away with, other ones I find not so good. But they all work on the same principle, and like the USA Strat that we saw, there are two pivot posts with a tremolo system like this, and again these have got like a knife edge. As you push the tremolo down, you get quite an extreme movement, partly because of the way that knife edge is constructed, the way that it allows the tremolo block to move, but also because of the fact that you've got the fixed string, the string fixed at the locking nut. It kind of accentuates the reduction or in case of pulling back, the increase in tension on the strings. In terms of setup, you don't have to worry so much about friction at the nut because it locks, but you do need to bear in mind that there's still the springs inside the body that need to be cleanly set up, and you need to make sure that there's no damage or anything that's going to stick on these knife edges, because that could cause the tremolo to not return to position properly. One problem I have had with it wasn't this particular guitar, it was another one that had a similar style tremolo, was it like an original Floyd Rose, and it's to do with the way that the saddles are set. Now if you remember on the traditional Strat trem, the way the saddles are, if you want to adjust the intonation on those, you move a screw backwards and forwards. Now there's no way that that saddle is going to slip under the tension of the strings. With the Floyd Rose system, what happens is you've got these saddles here that can slide backwards and forwards, and they're secured in place by a screw through into the plate of the trem. Now what I found with one of my guitars, for some reason one of these screws just wouldn't grip properly, and over time the tension of the string actually caused this whole saddle piece to move forward. So as well as knocking the intonation out, it also meant the string would just go slightly flat over time. And tried to rectify it by just tightening the screw, resetting the saddle and tightening the screw up, but for some reason the screw kept kind of slipping. Never got to the bottom of that one, to be honest. It's probably just a defective screw or something, but in the end I kind of sold the guitar on. This particular system, the shallow one, I've never had any bother with, and it's always worked really, really well for me. But that is a point of potential sort of instability with the Floyd Rose system, or you might find on some of the locking trem systems where the saddles are fixed like this. If you haven't got a good tight grip on these screws, then the saddles could get pulled forward under the tension of the strings. That said, you need to be careful not to screw these in too tightly, because you can actually fracture the block if you over tighten them. Now, another thing to mention, and this applies pretty much to any tremolo system where you've got it set so you can pull the tremolo back to increase the pitch on the strings, but it's much more of an issue with a locking tremolo. It's kind of more sensitive, and that's when you're playing. If you've got a tendency to put your hand on the bridge, which is useful because sometimes you want to palm mute the strings at the bridge. If you put too much pressure here, you're going to push the tremolo down and raise the pitch of the strings. It's kind of just a playing technique thing, and you will get used to it over time, but you need to be aware that you can't put your weight on the tremolo, because it'll knock the guitar slightly sharp. This applies with the Strat trem as well. If you've got it set for some upward movement, it's just you may not notice it so much because the range of movement is a little bit less on a Strat trem, because it's more pronounced on a locking tremolo system. It's probably where you notice you've got sort of bad hand on the bridge technique when you start playing a locking trem. In terms of the sounds and that you get out of a tremolo system like this, the movement's more extreme, so you can do more like dive bombs and stuff like that. But it's all very, very similar principles between a high-end locking tremolo system like this or traditional vintage Strat trem and all points in between. It's about making sure that everything's set up smoothly, no sharp edges, nothing anywhere where anything's going to catch, and eliminating all the points of friction so that the strings move smoothly and they always return back to where they're meant to be. Okay, so there's a few pointers for you, and if you keep those in mind when you're setting up your own guitar, hopefully tuning stability won't be a problem, and you'll be able to use the tremolo arm without worrying too much about knocking the guitar out of tune. Hope you found that useful. If you did, then please click on like, subscribe, all the various options down there. And if you've got a question or suggestion for a future video, then if you go here, there's a form where you can submit your question. As always, thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you in another video next time. Bye for now.